Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We've got 20 people online. There are more registrations, but we're going to start now with respect to those of you who joined on time. My name is Gary Parker. I'm the Managing Director of C&T Associates. We are a business support and fundraising organisation based in Southeast London. We write bids and applications for funding, and we do a lot of presentations as well. Today's presentation is called Making a Living from Writing, and I'm going to introduce shortly Christian Wolmar, who's a writer, presenter and TV pundit. He will introduce himself more fully shortly. Can I ask you all to keep yourselves on mute like most of you are doing at the moment? If you want to ask questions, you can ask questions after the presentation, which will take about 30 minutes or so. So there'll be plenty of time to do that. You can ask either by putting your remote hand up on screen or put it in the chat, and I'll try and pick it up. Also, if you don't want to be identified, because this presentation will go on our YouTube channel, it will also go on LinkedIn eventually, then please certainly don't speak, because we've got this system set up so you're only identified if you speak, and remove any of the distinguishing features and turn the camera off as well. This will last up to 1 hour, and you can put any other comments you've got in the chat, but be aware with the chat as well, people can get your details if you put them in there. So if you don't want to do that, then please don't put any information in the chat. What will happen afterwards is a copy of the presentation, a summary copy of this presentation, which is a summary, will be sent out to you immediately with a number of offers as well. One from Christian, because he is offering to give support. That will be in the email we're going to send out straight after this, and also some offers from C&T as well. We will put Christian's contact details in the chat as well, and indeed the C&T details, so you can contact him either directly or through C&T. So I'd like to start off by welcoming Christian. Christian and I have known each other for a number of years, and he first did this presentation in the good old days of live presentations before the pandemic started. So I'd like to welcome him here today, and in fact I can see your QPR scarf in the back. That's probably the Queen's Park Rangers, for those of you who don't follow football. That's probably the only thing I have against him, really. But you can't be perfect. So over to you, Christian.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Just so you see my face, but I'm now going to share my screen, and as Gary says, put any questions, best in the chat actually, and then Gary will read them out to me, or if at the end you want to email me or whatever, my details are there. But now I'm going to share my screen and start off, and hope this works.
Yes, it's working. Yeah,
it's working. Brilliant. Right. Right. Oops. Right. Okay. So just I suppose what I'm trying to get across in a little 20-25 minutes is that there's an awful lot of scope for making a career out of writing. It's not just narrowly focused on I've got to write the book, or even got to write the newspaper article or whatever. There's all sorts of different ways of making money and a career out of writing, and I'm going to take you through a few, starting off with me actually. I've been doing this for an awful long time. I taught myself to type. Now here's a useful skill. I taught myself to type when I was 13 at school because I wanted to work on the school newspaper. And of course, it ended up rather badly because I ended up typing everything and not writing anything because my typing skills were so useful that I never had time to do anything else. But my typing skills have stood me in very good stead. I don't take shorthand, but I do write notes very fast. And of course, these days, you don't have to write notes anymore. Everybody's got a voice recorder on their telephone, and I make heavy use of that. But being able to take notes is a great idea. So just to take you through a little bit through my career, I after failing to get on the school newspaper, I worked on the university newspaper, which was then called Campus. I think they've changed their name since then. And I eventually became editor, but I started writing news stories. In those days, we had to stick it all down with glue and type out the bits and pieces and use letter set, which I'm sure any of you under 55 or something will never have heard of, to make the headlines and all that. But it was a great experience. And if there's any of you who are students here, I really recommend getting involved in the campus newspaper if you have one. I then started looking for jobs in journalism. And of course, it was a very different world. And I have to emphasize that, so many times in this talk, actually, it is a very different world. But nevertheless, some of the skills I've learned over that period are still relevant and valid in the era that we live in. So my first very unglorious job was with a magazine called The Retail Newsagent, which, as it said on the cover, went to newsagents. Little would I know how even not only how newspapers disappearing, but even newsagents are fast disappearing. But in those days, it was a very flourishing sector. And actually, my first job was to edit various press releases that came in about new chocolates, and they very rarely sent samples, actually, new chocolates and new cigarettes or new brands and whatever, what the newsagents could sell, and get them every week. I produced about 3 pages of this little magazine, but it was a start. And I soon got a job on a business magazine called Marketing, which at the time was owned by Michael Heseltine, who's a politician you might have heard of, Lord Heseltine. And that was a great training, monthly magazine, writing features, going around the country a bit to kind of visit places, writing a piece on the marketing of Concorde, a plane that actually never sold any planes at all. And then I worked on a variety of publications. Spent a little bit of time at Camden Council, where I produced a magazine for the council, and then I got a job on the New Statesman. And eventually, at the ripe old age of 40, I got onto a national newspaper. Initially, the Observer, and then the Independent, the London Daily News, which was a very short kind of shortly lived newspaper that was produced by Robert Maxwell. And for the last 25 years, I've been entirely a freelance since 1997, in fact, writing books and doing freelance articles. And I have quite a widespread portfolio. I mean, I occasionally write for the national press, although less so these days. The last thing I did was a piece for the Daily Mirror a couple of months ago. It's just that partly demand has gone down, partly, they look to fresher faces, but I think for the most part, there are fewer opportunities to write stuff. And to give you an example of how things have changed, I used to write what are called op-eds, comment pieces in the Evening Standard in the late 90s and first decade of the 21st century. And they used to pay me £1,000. And then they paid me £500, and then they paid me £400, and then they paid £250, all for the same 1,000 words. So £1,000 was wonderful for a couple of hours of work. 250 for what often ends up being a day's work is fine, but it's not kind of a fortune. So that shows how things have changed. And because I specialized in transport, which I'll come to, I'll emphasize this more later. I started, when I went freelance, I had a commission to write actually 2 books. One was about actually abuse in children's homes, and that's a kind of subject I wrote about, but I haven't pursued enormously. But the other was about Stagecoach, which is the bus company. And I have followed that up with a whole series of other books. But I also started, because I was freelance and because railways were in the news, and I started writing a column for a magazine called Rail, which I've written for the past 25 years. Because of that, I started getting a lot of TV and radio invitations to appear. Particularly, when there was a series of rail accidents, and so I had a crash course in how to do TV by doing TV. I was initially very nervous, but I did actually learn how to do it, and actually I absolutely enjoy doing it these days, and I've managed to dispense with my nerves, which it's true of a lot of these things. If you do it, you lose your nerves. And as a result of that, also, I started writing books, as I say, Stagecoach, but then I've written a series of history books on the railways, ranging from a history of the London Underground called the Subterranean Railway to the story of Crossrail, which I'm just updating, which was supposed to come out when Crossrail opened, which is 2018. And I'm just updating it, so it will come out. The paperback version will come out when the line opens, hopefully in February or March next year. And then I get asked to do quite a lot of speaking at conferences, the odd bits of consultancy. So I have a kind of real portfolio type of job. And this is not something that everybody is happy doing. I do remember talking to various people saying, how do you cope with the sort of uncertainty of it all? And I suppose essentially, if you work for lots of people, and at one point I was working for about 20 different regular customers of one sort or another, it's very unlikely that all of them will dispense with your services kind of straight away. Of course, you can have major disasters like COVID, or you could kind of spectacularly fail in some task or whatever. But by and large, if you have a wide range of clients, and unfortunately my range is not as big, but I'm kind of more established. I'm not worried about it. You can actually pretty much guarantee that you'll get some work from somewhere. And I suppose my experience shows that all the different ways in which journalism and writing works, there are a lot of different skills, and I happen to have worked in most of them, but a lot of people just stick to 1 or 2 skills. So the skill of news writing, usually done by younger people. In a way, the most fun job actually is going out in the world and finding out what's happening, and having to file it straight away, and it appears in the paper the next day and is in his fish and chip paper the day after that. But there is something great fun about that. Features, of course, sort of longer kind of lead time, longer articles, but again, much. And I think this is the root of something that any of you are interested in journalism or that must always remember, that lots of people want to write about, oh, my experience or what I did today sort of thing. And that's not really very interesting. The key to all good reporting really is storytelling, finding out what's happening out there and writing about it, even if you're writing comment pieces or so on. I mentioned sport because that's I did write about, I used to cover Tottenham and Arsenal for a local newspaper for a year or so. And that's another way kind of into the profession. Lots of people, of course, are export people now come into journalism. Writing comment, I think writing comment is really a secondary kind of occupation. I don't think you very often go straight into that unless you have a particular expertise without some experience of the basic skills of journalism. And then there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff, like sub-editing, which basically means taking other people's copy and tidying it up or making précis of it or improving it or sometimes making it worse. But essentially it's a very necessary skill. Most copy that appears in newspapers has been sub-edited. It is noticeable that this is something of a lost art because things go in so quickly. But even if you write blogs or things, it's always a good idea for somebody else to have a look at it and check it out. And of course, fact check and legal check. You can get into trouble with the law. And then the other side, another backroom role is kind of commissioning stuff, getting people to write stuff. So I worked as a news editor for a while. Not desk job, not really my cup of tea. I much rather be out there, but it's again a very necessary skill. Or actually being the editor, which is different from sub-editing. Being the editor is actually deciding what goes in or doesn't go in a paper. And as I mentioned, books and experiences I've mentioned. So just a little bit more on some of the papers I worked on. I mentioned the retail news agent and marketing, but I've, for example, worked on a couple of Labour Party publications. There's a publication called New Socialist that was kind of something like a rival to the New Statesman. On the New Statesman, I was the news editor, a post that doesn't exist anymore, but I commissioned stuff, wrote some stuff, again, did some reporting. On the Observer, I was their local government correspondent and ditto on The Independent, where I covered local government for a while, and then later on transport. And as I say, it's not all glory. When I was on the Ham and High, the Hampstead and Highgate Express, I had to go and cover, as well as Arsenal and Tottenham, I had to cover Hendon, which was the local team. And going to Hendon at kind of 7:45 at night and covering and watching playing non-league football over the 6th or 7th tier was not very exciting, nor was going to courts very often. I did quite a lot for the Independent, going to courts, and you sit about for an awful long time before you get to the kind of juicy bits, or you do things like writing the news in brief column. It's called nibs, doing kind of fairly basic little bits of writing copy here and there. There is quite a lot of that in whatever kind of task you end up with. And then my most hated thing was Voxpops, which are increasing in demand, not just by the TV and radio, but even by written media, where you go and ask some random people in the street what they think, and I think it's a terribly lazy form of journalism, but for some reason it's quite popular. And then the real way to make a success of whatever type of journalism or writing or other kind of things you're trying to get into is to have some sort of specialty. What is your USP? What do you offer that other people won't? Where do you get that expertise from? I've listed a few of them here. As I say, sport tends, unfortunately, to no longer be a field where many ordinary journalists can get it. Obviously, you can still find some journalists in the written media, but on TV and radio, for example, it's all the sport is nearly all covered by people who were in a sport of one type or another before. I mean, Gary Lineker being the kind of classic example. You have to be over 50 to remember him as a footballer. It's quite a difficult area, but a very popular area. So a lot of competition. Politics, very big area still. Again, as with all these things, there are fewer political reporters than there used to be. When I joined the Independent, it was the biggest group of people. There are 5 or 6 political correspondents, filling up, a couple of pages every day, and this has waned somewhat. There's not kind of as many kind of people covering it. There's not as much. Well, I wouldn't say there isn't as much interest, but it's just less well covered, I think, than it used to be. And oddly enough, industrial correspondence were the biggest, the second biggest field when I joined the Independent in the 1989, and there were actually 3 or 4 people covering industry. And that was mainly covering labor relations and disputes and strikes and whatever. And nowadays, virtually nobody does that. Whereas on the other hand, there's a lot of people covering technology. Again, I think that's a field that is really ripe for people to focus on, because writing well about technology is both quite challenging, but also attracts very wide audiences. We're all stuck with tech. We all have to deal with tech. And yet there's not many people who kind of explain the background to it well. And in a way, that's what I do in my field, transport. It's all about explaining concepts that might be difficult for the layperson to understand, and doing it well. And that's a real skill. And if you have that skill, certainly the tech field is one to go into. The law is another ripe area where the same applies, where if you're able to explain legal technicalities and difficulties to an audience of the person on the Clapham omnibus or whatever, and that's really in demand. And maybe that's something I've missed out saying, but whenever you're writing, you always have to think of your audience. You always think, who am I writing for? And whatever I'm writing, I tend to write actually for the same person, really. I tend to write for the person who's vaguely interested in the subject that I'm writing, but doesn't know that much about it, and needs most things explained to them. Doesn't want lots of acronyms. Acronyms are really alienating. Doesn't want lots of expressions that they might not understand, but they do want kind of clear and simple expositions of the story. Transport, I've been lucky enough to mine the area of transport for the last 25 years. And I somewhat fell into it by mistake, because I was made transport correspondent of the Independent at an exciting time when the railways were being privatized. And so there's lots of news. But also it's one of those undermined areas. In other words, it's an area where I don't think enough attention is paid, because we all use transport every day. Transport is very reliant on tech. It's the big infrastructure schemes like, as I mentioned, Crossrail. There's a lot of politics involved. There's a big dispute, for example, at the moment over London's transport system and sort of battle between central government and local government, represented by the mayor. And so it's a field that I think again is ripe for people to think about as an area where they might want to focus. And then there is a huge swathe of foreign affairs, where again some specialist knowledge goes a very long way. If you know a lot about China and are able to keep in touch with people in China, there's a big scope for you to write about China. But even if it's a more obscure country, there's no shortage of stuff to write about, and editors will take material from covering foreign affairs. And of course, you can be lucky or unlucky. You can be expert in a country that nothing happens, and then suddenly there's a revolution, or vice versa. I mean, look, for example, at how little coverage there is of America now that there was just this time last year. America's kind of got slightly boring, and there's much less coverage than there used to be, and so on. So things go, as it were, in and out of fashion, and fashion being the last of these specialisms I mentioned. Again, that's a very special interest, not something I know anything about at all, but is always in the news and always attracts attention.
Christian, somebody's just asked, what about entertainment and celebrities? Is that not a big area?
Very good point. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I haven't covered every area here, and indeed, if I'm talking about growing areas, that is a growing area. And again, I mean, I'll talk in a minute about how to get stuff into papers, but certainly when you're talking about entertainment and celebrity, that is an area that is has a lot of competition. You only have to look, and see the photographers camped outside anybody of interest. But I think it's an area that is ripe for mining, particularly if you have contacts. And I've been talking, about the media and about really the conventional media, but we do live in a new world where there are a lot of outlets. The problem, as I will mention in the next slide, is getting paid for things. But in terms of outlets, there are vast numbers of outlets, and of course you can start by creating your own. Anybody can create a website. There's standard ways of creating a website. I mean, I use a website provider because he does a better job than I would, but you can create your own website. You can create, and you can immediately start writing your blog, and you can go on Twitter and try and get followers to the blog, and you can go on Facebook and so on, and try and develop interest in your blogs. The trouble is there's an enormous amount of competition out there, and who wants to listen to Joe Smith about what they think about this or that? But if you, as you have seen, if you hit the right note, if you happen to be in a field that suddenly is of massive interest, you can get massive amounts of followers, and you can start making money from the advertising that goes on your blog. I must say, from my own experience, even though I have a website that has pretty much the same number of people looking at it all the time, about between 100 and 150 a day generally, and it's been fairly consistent throughout the 15 years I've had it. It's gone up a bit, but I used to get considerable amounts of money, maybe as much as kind of £500 a year from the advertising on it now, and now I'm lucky to get £100 a year. So it does show that you need an even wider coverage to get anything like a reasonable amount of money. But you can create your own vlog, as it were, put stuff on YouTube, hope for the best. but you do need to kind of work out what you're trying to do, what your business model is, and how it's going to go, and how you'll spread it around the internet. How will you get it out there? How will as many people as possible see it? And obviously, I mean, you can use things like Medium and stuff if you don't have your own website. It's a toss-up. I mean, Medium doesn't necessarily attract many people if you don't have a name, but then your website, it might not be possible to kind of publicize it enough. It all depends on the strength of the stories you have, and how good you are at producing them, and how much interest you can get. Facebook, of course, is another outlet. I think in terms of getting messages out there quickly and building up a following quickly, Twitter is the most important. But that might be because for the audience that I kind of cover, Instagram is obviously very important for younger people, very important for picture stories and the like. And actually, when you ask young people which one they use most, a lot of them say Snapchat, which is the one where the things disappear after a few minutes and doesn't actually last long. It's horses for courses. You have to think, what is your main social media outlet? Just splashing it out there on everything doesn't necessarily work. I mean, it might be that you actually have to focus particularly on a specific aspect. I mean, I use my website and I send out a newsletter I try to do it every month. I could try and make money out of that through Patreon, outlets like that, where you get subscribers, and that again is a form of income, but it won't be enormous unless you have something that is unique and specialist to sell. So what you've been waiting for is, how do you carve out a business? Well, let's start with the straight media first, the conventional media. How do you interest editors? And this is more and more difficult. Even somebody with as much experience as me finds it quite difficult sometimes to just find the right person who to speak to, find out how interested they are likely to be. Obviously, I have a list of contacts. I know the featured editor, the Daily Mirror or whatever, and I know the people on the Guardian and so on. But it can be very hard kind of starting from scratch. And you have to be persistent. It's no good sending one email and saying, oh, they didn't answer, and that's the end of it. You really need persistence, but contacts is the be all and end all. So attending receptions, going to press conferences, a dying art, unfortunately. There aren't many press conferences, but attending events, attending conferences, attending trade shows, all that. It's all about contacts. And I do think that not only do you have to be canny and flexible, but you do have to have some sort of unique selling point, and that probably has to be some sort of speciality. What can you do that other people can't? What is your talent and skill, your knowledge, your specialism, your expertise that other people don't have? And here you've got to be prepared to make sacrifices. I mean, you're not probably going to get paid for the first piece of work you ever do. You might get it on a blog. You might get it on somebody else's blog, which is probably better than doing it on your own. You might kind of manage to get quite a lot of publicity out of it, but it's quite likely that you might not get paid, or if you do, you get paid some pittance. Just to give you an example, I did a piece for LBC yesterday, which after all is a national radio station now, and very often in the past they haven't paid me. They tend to now pay me £35, right? Of course, I don't have to go into a studio anymore. I do it speaking to the computer in the same way that I'm doing at the moment. But it's you take a lot of £35 to kind of make any serious money, and most of the other radio stations don't pay, particularly BBC local radio stations don't tend to pay. Talk radio, you'd be lucky to get anything out of them, and so on. And even with TV, mostly I do get paid for doing TV, but not always. And I've had rows with people about it where I've done kind of quite big, long interviews and stuff, and still not managed to get paid. It's a permanent struggle, and there's elements of catch-22. If you get established, you get paid, and they pay people who are established. It's what comes first. So obviously, as I've talked about the new media, a lot of that you will have to do for free initially, or even kind of permanently. I mean, obviously, doing my own website, I don't get anything for it. I do post articles that I've been paid elsewhere on my website, just as a kind of service to people. But it's tough getting paid. Even speaking, generally, I'll get paid for speaking at conferences, but again, not always. I probably might well turn it down if I'm not getting paid, but you can get paid very well, of course, once you get well established. Even even kind of if you're not that well established, you can get several £100s. I tend to have a daily rate where I say, well, it's £1,000 a day, and if it's half a day, it's 500 quid. Sometimes I get that. I don't always get that, but it kind of shows that I'm a serious player. I don't do things for free for commercial outfits, unless there is something really in it for me, like I can sell lots of books. So to finish up with, you have to work out what your business model is. You have to work out what risks you're prepared to take. You have to work out, I think, right from the beginning, what sort of writing you want to do, who you think you're going to aim at it, where you might be in 3 or 4 years' time if you're successful. Work out where you think you're going. But above all, I think you have to take risks. This is not an easy business. It's not a friendly business necessarily, and it's one where a bit of luck and good contacts kind of gets you along. But it's fantastic rewarding. I mean, making a living out of writing is just the most fun thing. I've done it for nearly 50 years now, and it's been fantastically fun and enjoyable. And there are certainly worse ways of earning money. So that's enough for me. I can talk about any of this, or indeed my political career, which is mentioned there on my Twitter account at Wolmar for London, and happy to answer your questions. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Christian. If you can stop the share now, then we can go back to full screen.
Okay. There you go.
Here we are. Right, I'll look in the chat first just to see. There's a question from Izzy. Do you have any advice for creative writers, poetry, prose, screenwriting, theatre, etc.?
I suppose the advice I'd have is take everything I've just said now and then double it in terms of difficulty. But it is possible. My friend, you can look this up, my friend Alexandra Page, who I know, who is married to somebody I played cricket with and worked for various banks. And she always had the idea of writing a children's book, a terribly difficult field to get into. Right, and she even had the idea some 15, 20 years ago, and she's now, I think, 40. She persisted. She sent me at one point a draft of her book, and I said how good it was. This book about rats and the London Postal Museum and hiding in the underground system that we used to run for the postal service in central London. Think, okay, good idea, but it's not fantastic, but it's a good idea. And lo and behold, she got a contract with Bloomsbury. She's just published her book. She sends me, she's on Twitter now signing copies of her book in kind of bookshops in far off places. And so it can be done. It is possible. But it's a very selective market. There's not many people make it, but a few do. And I would say that self-publishing is the big kind of question mark of our times over this. Is it worth self-publishing? And my thinking there is that you've got to show it to lots of people. My friend Alexandra showed her book to lots and lots of people. And they both improved it, criticized it, and praised it, and that gave her a lot of courage. And so she ended up not self-publishing it, but actually finding Bloomsbury, which you can't go better than heading straight for Bloomsbury. But so my advice would be, before you go down the self-publishing, I've got friends who've gone down self-publishing and their book has just fallen like a stone. They've got nowhere with it. They've spent the money on self-publishing, which costs quite a lot of money, and they've just got piles of books rotting in their garage. So I think before going down that route, you ought to try the more commercial route of touting stuff around, trying every contact you have, and above all, making your product good. And that's, I think, where Alex did so well, that it was a good product, and she managed to sell it because it was good, and that's a big issue. So show it to all your friends first. Show it to people who are not necessarily your friends, but are in the business. Anybody in the business, get them to comment on it, and so on. And of course, the best thing in the world, and Alex did find it, is to find an agent. That's the starting point. It is very difficult touting stuff around if you don't have an agent. I have an agent. I've had different agents. I published with 5 different book publishers, and that's only been done through an agent who has sold my books for me. So look, by all means, try it, but it ain't easy, and you have to be persistent.
Yeah. Got another question here. My daughter is a talented writer and is looking to train and become a copywriter. One idea that came up was for her to volunteer as a copywriter alongside doing formal and informal training. Would that work?
Yes, absolutely. But again, it's a contacts business. I'm not sure she should limit herself to copywriting necessarily. That's quite a limited field, and I think that if she wants a career in writing, I would open yourself up a bit more to kind of other things. Copywriting is very hard because it's précis, it's finding the right line and so on. It's tough, but as with all these things. Getting some work experience is absolutely priceless. But the problem is, as with everything in this world, that very often you can only get some work experience or whatever if you know somebody, and you're knocking on doors. If you're knocking on doors without knowing anybody, then it's tough. So my advice would be, by all means, try and get some relevant work experience, but don't limit to the copywriting. I'll tell you what, working on a local newspaper, where often, because local newspapers are so depleted of staff these days, you can get copy into, you can do stories for local newspapers, you can dig up stories and send them in and make contacts. I would try to do that just to get a few things in print. Getting your name in print, however modest an article, is a great start. So I wouldn't limit yourself I wouldn't limit your daughter to just going around trying to get relevant work experience. I try to, if she enjoys writing and wants to try and get her name in print, I would go the local newspaper route.
Yeah, Christian, got another question here from Shirley. How do you copyright your work?
You don't really. I mean, I write. I tend to write pretty much in one go. So I will write. I'll bash out my copy, but then I'll go through it straight away, and avoid things like having the same word twice in the sentence, or bad sentences, or whatever. So I edit it myself, and sometimes I get my wife, who happens to be a sub-editor, to edit it. But the most important thing I do actually is I hope, and if I've got time, I will always do this. I'll write it overnight. I mean, I'll write it one day, or go and have lunch, go and have a cup of tea, and then look at it again and read through it again. That's so important. You can't imagine how awful it is as an editor or commissioning editor to get copy that immediately reads badly because somebody hasn't done the basic subbing. So you have to do it yourself initially. But best of all is just get somebody else to have a look at it as well and say, oh, what does that mean? Or why have you used that word, or whatever. But do it yourself first. So write the thing, read through it, go and get a cup of tea, and then read through it again, and then maybe get somebody else. So you can never. It's always best to have a second kind of person looking at it, but you might not be possible.
Okay, we've got another question from Tom here, Christian. Would you recommend joining a professional association for writers, such as the Society of Authors?
Yeah, I think the Society of Authors only takes you once you've actually written a book. I am a member of the Society of Authors. I think you've had to have some published work, so it's a bit of a catch-22 there. Obviously, I'm a member of the National Union of Journalists. These days, it doesn't really make that much difference. I wouldn't necessarily kind of go down that path. Apparently, the Screenwriters Guild in America charges a vast amount for you to join them, and it doesn't guarantee you anything. But I don't think you can publish. You can't be a screenwriter without being a member. But no, I don't think that's how you start. Basically, I think you start by getting some experience, and later on, there's no magic bullet by joining a society.
Yeah. Another question from Akhil. Where can I find good editors?
I don't know. I suppose amongst journalism students might edit your stuff. Friends and colleagues, people who work in the business already. It's a very important question, because as I've said, I've recommended that you do kind of get a second eye over things. But I've got no idea where you find them when you don't know. I've always worked in a field where I've known dozens of journalists, and if I need any help with anything, I can always send it to them.
Yeah, some people are commenting on the copywriting and intellectual property. This is if you're concerned about that, my advice is to look at the British Library's website, because there's a lot of information on it about intellectual property, which is all free. And that's probably the best, because we deal with that in our other work we do here at CNT. So if you're bothered about copywriting, then look at the British Library's website, because there's a big section on intellectual property, which is what we're talking about here. But like Christian says, it's very, I work with a lot of photographers, and they say the same thing. It's very difficult to copyright your work. They tend to go hand in hand these days. Question from Barry Taylor. Hello, Barry. I've written a 10-minute film script for creative writing degree, but need 2 actors. Any ideas?
That's slightly beyond my field there. No, I'm sorry, not not something I can help you with.
Christian, you make one of the good. You would get into exactly the frame of one of the actors. How's that?
Fine. Fine. If it doesn't take too long, I'll give you some help.
Thank you.
Okay, there you go. On that. I mean, that might be an area that I can help Barry as well, because I work with a number of organisations in creative industries. So I'm including one that's a theatre school. So that might be a way forward. Let's just look if we've got any other questions. We are getting quite a few questions today. And I can't see any. So I've got one or two questions. Christian, what is the one piece of advice you would give to someone starting out or considering a career in writing, journalism, or blogging? Is there any one piece of advice that you think is important?
Yes, I think it's a rather odd thing to say, actually, but make sure you can write. And you'd be quite surprised that I've come across journalists who just can't write at all. And one of your people said, "Oh, my daughter's a good writer," and you can learn to write better. You can improve your writing, but some people just it's all about clarity, getting ideas across, structure. Making sure that you know what you want to say, and so on. And it just there is an element that like, I don't think I can be an actor, Barry, but but some people really shouldn't go down the writing route unless I'm not saying that you need a fantastic amount of talent. And there's different types of writing. So, if you're good at précising something and telling a story concisely, that's a talent. If you're good at kind of, describing what the bush outside your house looks like, that's a talent. If you're good at writing a headline in 4 words, that's a talent. So there's all sorts of different aspects to it, and I'm good at some of them, and I'm crap at others. I never find the titles for my books. I struggle finding titles for my books, but I do know how to write a chapter of a book. And I do know how to write a book, and I do know how to structure a book. So you don't need all those skills, but it does help to have 1 or 2 of them. And I think, if you push me, I think the most important skill is being able to listen and reproduce stories. To listen to people's stories and repeat whatever type of writing you're doing. That's kind of what you're trying to convey usually. You're muted. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, a couple of other ones. What is your biggest selling book, and why you think it sold so well?
Oh, that's an interesting question, because some of my books have sold much better than others. And my latest book, Cathedrals of Steam, has sold more in hardback than any of my others. Now, partly I've got a bit of a name now, but partly it's the subject matter. And I'll tell you, one of the big subject matters for me, and this is London. Books about London always sell. And my latest book is about London stations. There's some stuff about architecture in it. There's some stuff about history in it. There's some stuff about the urban realm and whatever. And all those are kind of trigger points. People like things about history, architecture, railways, London. So my best-selling book by far is the first of my history books, my series. I've done 8 or 9. And that is The Subterranean Railway, which again is London. It's the story of the London Underground. And I remember going up to Waterstones in Leeds and them saying, "Gosh, your book sells really well in Leeds." And you think, how come a book about the London Underground sells in Leeds? It's because people are absolutely fascinated by it. And I'll tell you what, one of the best transport books that sells, and is now in God knows how many editions, is about the closed stations of the London Underground. People absolutely love that type of stuff. So, and books that have sold less well have been the rather general books. Like I wrote a book called Blood, Iron and Gold, which was a bit too extensive in scope. It didn't really have a USP. It's a kind of history of the world's rail, what the railways did for us, but it was kind of too broad. And then on the other hand, I wrote a book called Engines of War, which is about railways and war. And I'm writing another book about railways and war, in fact, about the Normandy invasion. And that immediately is a hit. War. So it's the subject. It's finding that subject that kind of attracts an audience. But it's not always easy to work that out in advance. You can write a book on those fields that flops, or you can write I didn't think the book about London stations would actually kind of sell that well, and it's just come out in paperback, by the way. It sold like hotcakes. You know, partly they packaged it well. They put a lovely cover on it, gold colored. They did lovely end plates. I mean, it's like a nice present for people. So again, that's an aspect of it.
And do you find that if you get a book that sells particularly well, that all your back catalogue starts to sell as well, or is this
no, absolutely. Subterranean Railway is still in print, you know, when Cathedrals came out, they reprinted Subterranean Railway because they thought it was linked, and did a new cover for it, and so on. So the more successful I am, the more the back catalogue sells. It doesn't make me a fortune. Some of the books will never earn out. In other words, I haven't explained this, but I get paid a certain amount as an advance for a book, which is, you know, a 5-figure sum in my case, which means that I have time to do it, you know, nearly full time. And sometimes you earn out. In other words, if the royalties on your book, which is about 10 or 12% of the cover price for each book, so maybe a 20 quid book, it's 2 quid every time, say. So if those 2 quids amounts to more than my advance, I get extra money. But if it doesn't, I never get any more money. So even if they sell quite a lot, if it doesn't get up to the advance, I don't get any more money. So it's a bit of a gamble, but they never ask for your advance back, luckily.
Right. We've had a couple of comments. One from Victoria said that she reviewed your book, Cathedrals of Steam, favourably. So,
Jolly, please do send me a copy, Victoria. I'd love to see it.
And Barry Taylor's just written, Christian, another good London-wide interest in is cemeteries and all the stories that emanate.
Oh, absolutely. I'll tell you something. What sold the book to the publisher, actually, of Cathedrals and Steam, was the fact that next to Waterloo Station, there used to be a station called Waterloo Necropolis, which was actually a station for the dead. And it ran special trains, 1 or 2 trains a day, out to Brookwood Cemetery on the Hampshire-Surrey border. And it was that story, which I put in the synopsis, that actually ended up selling the book. So, I mean, you're dead right, Barry. Cemeteries, you know, for some reason, sell books. I've got no idea why, but people love those stories.
Yeah. Somebody that I know has been writing a book about cemeteries, the commercial aspects of them, because you've got privatized cemeteries these days. And the first privatized cemetery was in Gravesend, which is kind of
course, which is a fantastic story I wrote about when I was at the Independent, about the Westminster cemeteries that were in Finchley and elsewhere that was sold off for 5p and caused an absolute amazing scandal. I cover that story and ended up with causing the demise of Dame Shirley Porter. And they sold off these cemeteries without any maintenance grant to go with them. And it was a wonderful story. And it hit the front page of the Independent for several weeks.
Right. So
it's not a dead end. Cemeteries are not a dead end.
No, it's quite interesting and surprising, and would never occur to many of us. I think we've run out of time now. Thank you, Christian. This has been fascinating as usual, and I'd like to thank everybody who's been on. Maybe we can get you back at some stage in future. What's going to happen is that this will go on to YouTube in due course, and then probably on LinkedIn as well. So if anybody is interested in that, you can see it there. Also, you're going to get an email very, very shortly with a number of offers from Christian, because he is offering to review your work and do a limited amount of coaching in a special package. So you'll get an email about that. And of course, all the usual CNT services will be on offer as well. And if you look at our website and the emails, if you're now on our email list, we'll be notifying you of further presentations that we're doing in future. But I would like to thank Christian for his time today. It's been very useful, and I hope you've learned something from this. So thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you could just stay on the line, Christian, while people are leaving. I just want to,
okay.
but that's great. And thank you, everybody.